On my wedding day, my wicked mother-in-law humiliated me in front of my entire family. You're just the daughter of a gardener. My son could have anyone at his level, not you. A penniless nobody who doesn't belong in our world, she said mockingly. But she never imagined that, months later, Camila adjusted the folds of her simple wedding dress, her hands trembling as she looked at herself in the mirror of the small church room where she had been left to get ready. The white fabric was soft, but it wasn't silk or luxurious. It was a dress her mother had sewn with dedication and love. This is enough, she told herself over and over again. But deep down, the weight of the difference between her world and Elias's crushed her heart. She couldn't help but remember the looks of disdain she had received from his family over the past few months. Her father, Julian, a sturdy man with hands hardened by years of working the land, peeked through the door with a proud smile, but his eyes showed a hint of concern. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," he said, entering slowly so as not to wrinkle his somewhat worn but clean shirt. Camila smiled weakly, grateful for his attempt to give her confidence. She knew her father had done everything he could to support her, even with all the doubts he also had. But how could she feel secure when Elias's parents, sitting among the guests outside, didn't accept her? Her love for Elias was undeniable, but the reality they faced weighed more and more on her heart. "Thank you, Dad," she replied, taking his hand gently. "But I can't stop thinking about what's about to happen out there." Julian sighed, stepping closer and placing a hand on her shoulder. "The only thing that matters is that you two love each other. Everything else, well, you'll figure it out together." Camila nodded, though she couldn't help but think of the biting words Carlos and Susanna, Elias's parents, had spoken more than once. "She's just the gardener's daughter," Susanna had said, as if it were a sentence. "He could have anyone, someone at his level," whispered the family friends. But Elias had never doubted. He always defended her, always chose her. That kept her strong, even as the voices of contempt echoed in her head. The sound of guests starting to settle outside the church let her know the moment was near. Her heart raced, and she took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. Julian, sensing his daughter's nervousness, squeezed her hand once more. "Elias loves you. That's all that matters today." Camila smiled, her eyes moist with emotion, and nodded. She knew it was true, but she couldn't ignore the weight of the stares she would feel on her once she crossed those doors. Outside, Elias stood at the altar, trying not to show his own anxiety. He knew what was coming. He knew what his parents had prepared, especially his father, Carlos, who had been clear with him in private. "If you marry that girl," Carlos had said, his voice heavy and controlled, "you will be signing your exit from this family. You will be disinherited, Elias. There will be no going back." The warning still echoed in his mind. Susanna, his mother, more diplomatic, but just as calculating, had tried to dissuade him more subtly. "Elias, you can have everything you've ever dreamed of," she had said softly, "but with her, it will be a hard life. She's not up to your level. She doesn't understand our world. Don't let this mistake ruin your future." Elias, however, could not be convinced. He loved Camila, and he knew what they shared was genuine, far more genuine than any other superficial relationship his family might have wanted for him. He knew that money and power couldn't replace what he felt for her. Still, his family's pressure haunted him like a shadow. When the church doors opened and Camila appeared at the threshold, all thoughts vanished. Elias saw her, and nothing else mattered. She was his anchor, the reason he was willing to defy everything. Camila walked slowly toward him, the shimmer of tears in her eyes reflecting the mix of emotions they both shared. In the front row, Carlos looked at his son coldly. Susanna, with an expression of resignation, kept her head held high, but her disdain for the bride was obvious to everyone around her. Camila felt her steps heavy, but when her eyes met Elias's, something inside her calmed. There he was, her refuge. His love was so palpable that she almost forgot the people watching her with judgments disguised as polite smiles. When she reached the altar, Elias took her hands in his, squeezing them gently. "We're in this together, Camila," he whispered. She nodded, barely holding back tears. She knew what was coming next wouldn't be easy. The priest began with the formalities, but before the crucial moment of the vows arrived, Carlos stood up from his seat. The whispers among the guests grew louder. Elias frowned, knowing his father wouldn't miss the chance to make his final statement. "Excuse me, Father," Carlos said, interrupting the flow of the ceremony, "but I think I have something to say before we go any further." The priest, confused, paused and looked to Elias for some signal, but Carlos didn't wait. He addressed the guests, his voice clear and authoritative. "As the father of the groom, I feel it's my duty to make sure everyone here understands what's happening today." Camila felt the weight of every word Carlos spoke like a punch to her stomach. Elias tensed, ready to intervene, but Carlos continued. "Today, my son Elias is marrying Camila, the gardener's daughter. I'm not here to insult anyone, but to make clear what this means for our family." The murmurs among the guests grew as the stares turned toward Camila, some filled with sympathy, others full of judgment. "Elias has chosen to ignore everything we've done for him, everything we've built together as a family, to marry a woman who is clearly not up to his level." Camila felt the air leave her chest, but before she could react, Elias let go of her hands and stepped forward. "Dad, that's enough," Elias said, his voice firm and filled with restrained anger. Carlos didn't seem affected by his son's words. He looked at him with a coldness only those closest to him knew. "I'm sorry, son, but if you choose to go through with this, you will be renouncing your inheritance, your place in the family, everything. There will be no turning back." The room fell silent. The guests held their breath, waiting for Elias's response. Everyone knew this moment would change everything. Elias stood motionless in front of his father, feeling the weight of his words fall upon him with overwhelming force. The room, once filled with whispers and glances, now felt like an unfathomable void where only Carlos's words echoed. "You will give up everything." Camila, by his side, looked at him with her heart in her throat, her eyes shining with uncertainty, waiting for him to look at her, to somehow reassure her. But at that moment, all Elias could feel was a mixture of rage and pain. Carlos, still standing, observed his son with a cold and calculating look, as if wanting to remind him who held the power in that room. But what he didn't understand was that Elias had already made his decision, long before that day. "Dad," Elias finally said, his voice low but firm, "I know what this means to you. I know what you expected from me, what you always wanted me to do. But this is my life. And I'm choosing Camila because I love her, because I know that with her, I can be happy." Carlos frowned, as if those words had no value to him. "Love, you say?" His voice was filled with disdain. "Elias, love doesn't fill bank accounts, it doesn't open doors, it doesn't give you the respect you need to continue building an empire. Do you really think that with her by your side, you'll have the future we've prepared for you?" Susanna, Elias's mother, remained seated, watching the scene with a look of resignation, but not without a small spark of sadness. She knew there was no turning back, and although she wanted her son to make a decision that would benefit the family, she couldn't help but feel the pain that all of this was causing. "Carlos, please," Susanna whispered, trying to soften the atmosphere. "This isn't the time for this." But Carlos didn't listen. He was determined to make his son understand the price of his decision. Elias, gritting his teeth, looked directly into his father's eyes. The silence in the room was deafening. Each person present held their breath, aware that what was happening wasn't just a family conflict, but a silent war for Elias's soul. "I don't need your money or your respect to be happy," Elias continued, his voice more firm. "I've realized that what you're offering me is a golden cage. And Camila," he turned to her, gently taking her hand, "she offers me freedom. She's all I need to feel complete." Camila, hearing those words, felt the tears threatening to fall from her eyes. Elias had always been her rock, but at that moment, as he stood up to his own father for her, she understood the true extent of the sacrifice he was making. The love he professed wasn't superficial or fleeting. It was a promise of life, of a future together, even if the circumstances were against them. Carlos clenched his fists, clearly frustrated by his son's lack of obedience. Since Elias was little, he had imagined a glorious future for him, filled with success and power, controlling the family business and taking the family name to new heights. But now, all that effort seemed to be crumbling before his eyes because of a woman who, in his opinion, had nothing to offer. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life," Carlos snapped, looking at Elias as if he were a stranger. "This woman will ruin you. And when that happens, don't expect us to lend you a hand." The cruelty of those words made Camila lower her head, but Elias didn't waver. He squeezed Camila's hand tighter, determined not to let his father break the love they had built with so much effort. "Then I won't have to come back," Elias replied calmly, though his heart was pounding. "If being with her means losing everything else, then I'll accept it." Carlos shook his head slowly, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. He took a step back, leaving the microphone, clearly defeated in his attempt to control the situation. The room remained silent, but this time it wasn't because of the tension between father and son, but because of the astonishment of the guests at what they had just witnessed. It was rare to see someone like Elias so openly challenge his powerful family. Finally, it was Susanna who stood up. She walked over to her son, her eyes full of conflicting emotions. She had hoped things wouldn't come to this point, but now there was nothing she could do. She stopped in front of him, glancing briefly at Camila before turning her gaze back to her son. "Elias," she said softly, with a contained sadness, "you know what this means for your future, don't you? You know that. We can't move forward if you choose this path." Elias looked at her, knowing that those words came from a mother who loved him, but also from a woman trapped in a world of expectations and unbreakable rules. "I know, Mom," he responded, his tone softer, "but this is the future I want. Camila is my family now." Susanna nodded, saying nothing more. She knew her son had already made his decision, and as much as it hurt, she wasn't going to fight anymore. She gave a sad look to her husband, who had already returned to his seat, defeated in his attempt to control the situation. When Susanna returned to her seat, the ceremony continued, though the atmosphere was still charged with tense and strange energy. Elias and Camila exchanged vows, both aware that their path together wouldn't be easy. But as they held hands and looked into each other's eyes, they knew that what they had shared, what they had sacrificed, was worth more than any fortune or inheritance. "I love you," Elias whispered as he slipped the ring onto her finger, his words filled with a promise for the future. Camila, with her eyes full of tears, responded with a warm smile, one that made her feel that despite everything, they were in the right place. The ceremony ended with timid applause and some murmurs. The guests knew that what they had just witnessed was more than a wedding. It was an act of rebellion, a declaration of love that defied power and money. As Elias and Camila walked together toward the exit, hand in hand, they knew that although the road ahead would be full of difficulties, they had already won the most important battle, the one of choosing their own destiny, no matter the cost. And as they crossed the threshold of the church, they realized that together, they could face anything. The first few months after the wedding were like a dream for Elias and Camila. Despite everything they had left behind, they had each other, and that seemed enough. At first, the small apartment they rented in a modest neighborhood felt warm, filled with love and hope. Camila took care of decorating it with simplicity, but with a personal touch that made every corner radiate her essence. Elias, meanwhile, worked tirelessly, seeking new opportunities to build their life together, far from the shadows of his family. However, that peace was short-lived. The first signs came when Elias began to notice that the doors that once opened easily were now closing in his face. Companies he had worked with in the past no longer welcomed him. Meetings that had been automatic were now impossible to arrange. At first, he thought it was a coincidence or perhaps the natural adjustment of having given up his family's support. But soon, he realized something more sinister was at play. One afternoon, after a failed meeting, Elias sat alone in a cafe, staring at his reflection in the window. He felt defeated, as if the weight of his decision to stand up to his father was finally beginning to take its toll. Then, his phone rang. It was Hector, an old family friend who had also worked at his father's company. Hector's tone was solemn, almost compassionate. "Elias, I wanted to call you so you would hear it from me, not from someone else," Hector said, his voice low. "Your father has spoken to everyone. He's made sure that no partner, no reputable company, offers you work. He's made it clear that anyone who supports you, or Camila, will be going against him." Elias felt his stomach drop. He knew his father was a powerful man, but he never imagined he would go this far. "Is he doing this for revenge?" Elias asked, though deep down he already knew the answer. Hector paused, as if unsure of what to say. "It's not just revenge. He wants you to come back, but on his terms. He says everything can be fixed if you leave Camila and return to the family." Elias clenched his fist on the table, feeling a helpless rage rise in his throat. He knew his father saw everything as a power game, another strategy to control him. But this wasn't business. It was his life, his marriage, his love for Camila. "That's not going to happen, Hector." "I'm not leaving Camila," Elias replied, his voice trembling with contained anger. "No matter what he does." "I know, but be careful, Elias," Hector said, in a more serious tone. "He's determined to destroy any chance you have. And I think this is just the beginning." Elias hung up the phone, feeling as if the ground had been ripped from under his feet. He knew standing up to his father would have consequences, but he never imagined it would go this far. Elias, a man used to forging his own destiny, realized he was trapped in a web he couldn't control. He knew his father had the power to erase his reputation in the business world, and it was starting to destroy his chances of keeping their home. When he got home that night, Camila was waiting for him, as always, with a warm, worried smile. But that night, Camila's smile wasn't enough to lift Elias's spirits. He sat on the couch without saying a word, his shoulders slumped, his gaze distant. "What happened, Elias?" Camila asked softly, sitting beside him. Elias looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't know what to say. He knew she had already felt the tension, that money was starting to run out and opportunities were disappearing. But telling her that all of this was part of his father's plan made him feel even more powerless. "My father, he's made sure I can't work anywhere he has influence," he finally said, his voice flat. Camila looked at him in silence for a moment, taking in what that meant. She knew Carlos was capable of many things, but it was still hard to accept that someone could do something so cruel, even to their own son. "And what does he want?" Camila asked, though she already knew the answer. "He wants me to leave you. He wants me to go back and do things his way, like always." Elias let out a bitter sigh. "He says if I leave you, he'll give me everything back, that I can have the life he always wanted for me." Camila felt a knot form in her stomach. It wasn't the first time she wondered if her love was destroying Elias's life. She knew he had lost everything to be with her, and though she had never said it, she feared that at some point the burden would be too much for him. But when their eyes met, she saw the same determination in Elias's eyes that had won her over from the beginning. "Elias, I can't ask you to keep losing everything for me," Camila said, her voice barely a whisper. Elias looked at her, shocked that she would even think that. He took her hand tightly, as if afraid that his father's words could pull her away from him. "You're not asking me. I chose this. I chose you. And I would choose you 1,000 times over." His voice broke, but his gaze was steady. "I'm not going to let him win. I'm not leaving you." Camila felt tears fall down her cheeks, not from sadness, but from the love and strength Elias was showing her in that moment. But they both knew the road they were on was uncertain, and that Carlos's shadow would not stop haunting them. The following weeks were even harder. The money began to run out, and with every door that closed, Elias felt more powerless. He looked for work wherever he could, but the rumors had already spread. Elias, the rebellious son, is blacklisted. Even in places where his family didn't have direct influence, his name had become synonymous with trouble. Camila tried to contribute what she could, but her skills and connections weren't enough to keep them afloat. One day, as Elias sat in the small kitchen, going over the few remaining job options, the phone rang again. This time, it wasn't Hector. It was his father. "You know it doesn't have to be this way, Elias," Carlos said, his voice soft but filled with that cold authority he had always wielded over him. "Everything can go back to the way it was. You just need to make the right decision." Elias gripped the phone, anger boiling inside him, but he tried to stay calm. "The right decision according to you, Dad, not according to how I feel." "I'm not leaving Camila." Carlos paused, as if assessing the situation before continuing. "Very well, then let's keep playing this game. Let's see how long you can last with nothing. When you run out of options, you'll know where to find me." Elias hung up the phone, feeling more defeated than ever. He knew his father wouldn't back down, but neither would he. Still, the weight of the situation was beginning to crush him. Camila walked into the kitchen at that moment, seeing the expression on Elias's face. "It was your father, wasn't it?" she asked with a mix of concern and resignation. Elias nodded, unable to speak. He stood up and hugged her tightly. Camila nestled into his chest, and in that moment, they both understood that what was at stake wasn't just their love, but their ability to stand strong against a relentless force trying to tear them apart. But as Elias gently stroked Camila's hair, he realized something. His father could take everything from him, except the most important thing. Time kept passing, and the difficulties seemed to multiply for Elias and Camila. Money was scarcer than ever, and job opportunities for Elias were disappearing at a relentless pace. But amid that storm came news that would change their lives forever. One afternoon, while Elias was out looking for work, Camila sat in the small bathroom of their apartment, holding a pregnancy test in her hands. Her heart was racing. The result was clear: she was pregnant. Mixed emotions swirled inside her. On the one hand, immense joy at the thought of becoming a mother, but on the other, fear of what this would mean amid the challenges they were already facing. When Elias arrived home, exhausted and with a downcast expression after another unsuccessful day, he found Camila sitting on the couch, her eyes filled with tears, but this time not from sadness. Unsure of what was happening, Elias quickly approached her, concerned. "What's wrong, love?" he asked, kneeling in front of her. Camila took his hands and gave him a small smile through her tears. "I'm pregnant, Elias." For a moment, Elias's world seemed to stop. His mind tried to process what he had just heard. A child. A baby. Despite all the chaos surrounding their lives, that news filled him with a warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. Slowly, a smile spread across his face, and tears began to fill his eyes as well. "Really?" he asked, his voice breaking with emotion. "We're going to be parents?" Camila nodded, and at that moment, Elias hugged her tightly, both letting their tears of joy fall freely. For the first time in months, there was a ray of hope amidst the darkness. A child. That little being they hadn't even met yet was already giving them a new reason to fight. However, reality soon set in. With the baby on the way, their needs would multiply, and they knew they had to find a way to get ahead, and fast. That's when Camila remembered one of the few talents she had always enjoyed, making cakes. Camila had learned to make cakes as a child with her mother in the modest kitchen of their home. It was something that made her happy and on more than one occasion had surprised those who tried them. At that moment, she thought maybe that skill could be the answer they were looking for. "Elias," she said one night during dinner, "I've been thinking. I could start selling cakes. I know it's not much, but if we sell them online, maybe we can make some money." Elias looked at her with interest. He knew Camila's cakes were amazing, but he hadn't thought of selling them as a source of income. "Do you think?" he asked, though he could already see the potential of the idea. "I could help you with the deliveries, and we can create a page to promote them." Camila nodded enthusiastically, happy that he agreed. That night, they stayed up late designing a plan. Elias, with his basic tech skills, created a simple page on social media where they could post pictures of the cakes Camila would start making. She, on the other hand, began experimenting with new recipes and decorations, wanting to offer something special. The first few weeks were slow. They sold a few cakes here and there, delivering them to local customers who found their page. Elias made the deliveries by bicycle as they couldn't afford a car. At first, it wasn't much, but every time he returned from a delivery, he brought back a smile. "People love your cakes," Elias would say excitedly. "Today, they told me they're the best cakes they've ever had." Camila, despite the exhaustion from pregnancy and the long hours in the kitchen, felt like they were finally finding a way forward. With each order, her confidence grew. The small kitchen in their apartment had become an improvised bakery, with flour and sugar scattered everywhere, and the sweet aroma of cakes filling every corner. One day, while Elias was making a delivery to a regular customer, a man in a suit waiting at the entrance of a large building caught his attention. The man, who seemed to be eyeing the box of cakes Elias was holding with interest, approached him with curiosity. "Are those cakes yours?" the man asked with a friendly smile. "They're my wife's," Elias replied kindly. "I just make the deliveries." The man nodded, looking closely at the box. "I work for a chain of coffee shops," he said, introducing himself as Roberto, a manager for a major local food company. "We're looking for something different to offer in our locations, and your cakes have a great presentation. Would you mind if we tried them at our main cafe? If they're good, we could make a deal to supply them regularly." Elias was speechless for a moment. Was this a real opportunity? After everything they had been through, could this be the break they needed? "Sure," he finally replied, feeling adrenaline rush through his body. "I can bring a bigger sample next week." When Elias arrived home that afternoon, he could barely contain his excitement. "Camila, you won't believe what happened," he said, rushing into the apartment. "A manager from a chain of coffee shops wants to try your cakes. This could be a huge opportunity." Camila looked at him in surprise, her eyes wide. "Really?" she asked as if she couldn't believe it. Elias nodded, hugging her tightly. "Let's do this, Camila. This could be what we've been waiting for." That night, as Elias and Camila hugged in the small bed they shared, they felt more optimistic than they had in months. They knew the road ahead would still be difficult, but now there was a chance, a spark of hope that hadn't been there before. And most importantly, they were doing it together. The following week, Camila prepared her best cakes, and Elias made sure the delivery was flawless. They brought them to the chain's main cafe, and Roberto, the manager, was impressed by both the quality of the product and the story behind it. A few days later, they received the call that would change their lives. "We love your cakes," Roberto said. "We'd like to make a contract for weekly supplies." Elias and Camila couldn't believe it. For the first time, after so much struggle and sacrifice, there was a real opportunity to move forward. They were starting to build something of their own, something that not even Carlos could take away from them. As Camila caressed her now more pronounced belly, and Elias looked at her with a smile full of love and pride, they knew that despite all the difficulties, they had won the most important battle, staying together, facing everything life threw at them, and now, with the hope of a better future for themselves and their child. The months following the contract with the coffee chain brought a significant change in Elias and Camila's life. Slowly, the orders increased, and what began as a small venture to survive turned into a growing business. Camila, with her increasingly prominent belly, spent long hours in the kitchen, creating new recipes and ensuring that every cake was perfect. Meanwhile, Elias, always eager, took care of deliveries, logistics, and began managing the accounts and contracts that came in thanks to the growing popularity of the cakes. However, success did not come without its own challenges. The work was becoming exhausting for Camila, and the pregnancy, now in its last trimester, was leaving her drained as the days went on. One afternoon, as she was bent over the counter, decorating a cake for a new delivery, she felt a sharp pain in her back that made her stop. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself, but the pain didn't go away. Elias walked in at that moment, carrying a large box of supplies, and when he saw the look on Camila's face, he immediately set everything aside. "Are you okay?" he asked, quickly approaching her. Camila looked at him with a weak smile, trying to downplay the situation. "I'm fine, it's just, the baby is restless today," she replied, though the discomfort was clear. Elias watched her with concern. He knew that while Camila was incredibly strong, they couldn't ignore the fact that her body needed rest. He knelt beside her, gently taking her hand. "Camila, you should rest a bit. You've been working too much," he said tenderly but firmly. She shook her head slightly. "We have so many orders, Elias. We can't stop now. This is what's keeping us afloat." Elias stroked her cheek, his face reflecting the mixture of love and worry he felt. "I know, but your health and the babies are more important than any cake. Let me take care of the rest for today. Please rest." Camila finally nodded, realizing that she couldn't keep ignoring the signs from her body. Elias guided her to the couch and helped her sit comfortably. Then, he returned to the kitchen, determined to finish the order himself. That night, while Camila rested, Elias reviewed the finances and the upcoming orders. The business was growing faster than they had anticipated, and while that was a cause for celebration, it also meant they had to find a way to manage the workload. Hiring help would be the smartest choice, but they were still recovering financially and couldn't afford large expenses. The next morning, while they were having breakfast together, Camila picked up her teacup and looked at Elias thoughtfully. "I've been thinking, maybe we should look for a small shop," she said, surprising Elias. "A shop?" he asked, looking up from his newspaper. "Don't you think it's a bit too soon for that?" Camila smiled, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "It's not too soon. If we keep growing at this pace, we'll need more space. Besides, if we have our own place, we could hire someone to help me in the kitchen. We can't keep working out of the apartment, especially once the baby is here." Elias thought for a moment. The idea of having their own shop had always been a dream, but the circumstances of the past few months had kept him focused solely on survival. However, hearing Camila speak with such hope, he knew that dream was closer than they thought. "You're right," he finally said, smiling. "Let's start looking. It won't be easy, but if we find the right place, we can take the next step." Camila smiled back at him, feeling an immense sense of relief. Although the road to that moment had been difficult, there was now a new horizon full of possibilities. The following weeks were filled with excitement and nervousness. Elias handled the deliveries and continued searching for possible locations, while Camila, despite her advanced pregnancy, kept managing the orders from home with the occasional help of a neighbor who offered to assist. Finally, one day, after weeks of searching, they found a small shop in the city center, right next to a popular coffee shop. It was modest, but it had everything they needed: a spacious kitchen, a customer service area, and a display window that could attract passers-by. The rent was fair, and with a little effort, they knew they could turn it into something special. "This is the place," Camila said excitedly as they walked through the empty space, imagining how they would decorate it and how it would look filled with fresh cakes. "I can see it all, Elias. This will be our home away from home." Elias watched her, feeling a mixture of pride and love. Despite everything they had been through, they were building something of their own, something no one could take away from them. "We'll make it happen," Elias promised, taking her hand. "This will be our next step." With the contract signed and the keys in hand, they began the renovations. It was a slow process as they continued handling orders while preparing the shop for opening. But with each passing day, the place was transforming, and with it, their lives. One afternoon, as they were painting the walls of the new shop, Camila stopped, placing her hand on her belly. "I think the baby's excited too," she said with a smile. "He's been moving a lot today." Elias quickly moved closer, placing his hand on Camila's belly, feeling the small movements. "He's going to be a great baker, I can already tell," he joked, his eyes full of love. Camila laughed, but her laughter was interrupted by a small groan of pain. Elias looked at her with concern. "Are you okay?" She nodded, though the pain was clear. "I think it's just the baby getting comfortable, but maybe we should head home and rest." Elias didn't hesitate. He knew the past few weeks had been exhausting for both of them, but especially for Camila. They left the tools and went home, knowing that while there was still much to do, the most important thing was Camila and the baby's health. The business was on its way, the plans were progressing, and the future was starting to take shape. Every day, despite the challenges, Camila and Elias felt closer to achieving their dreams. They knew the road hadn't been easy, but they also knew they had traveled it together, and that made them invincible. And although the problems and shadows of the past were still present, the success they were building with their own hands was the best testament that love and perseverance could overcome even the highest barriers. Elias and Camila had been working tirelessly to finish the final details of the new store. The grand opening day was fast approaching, and although both were exhausted from the long workdays, there was a mix of excitement and nervousness in the air. The dream of owning their own business was about to come true, but the pressure of making sure everything went smoothly was beginning to weigh on them, especially with the baby so close to arriving. One morning, as Camila was finishing arranging the displays in the new store, she felt a sharp pain in her abdomen. At first, she thought it was just another discomfort from the pregnancy, but this time, the pain was stronger, and a feeling of unease swept over her. She stopped, breathing deeply, and rested her hands on the counter, hoping the pain would pass. Elias, who was outside reviewing some papers, came in just then and saw her bent over, her face tight with pain. "Camila?" he asked worriedly, rushing over to her. "What's wrong?" She tried to smile to reassure him, but the pain wouldn't let her pretend. I think the baby's ready to come," she said in a shaky voice. Elias felt a rush of fear and excitement flood him at the same time. He knew the moment was near, but he hadn't expected it to be so soon. "We need to get to the hospital," he said urgently, grabbing the keys and carefully helping Camila to her feet. The drive to the hospital was a mix of tension and excitement. Camila breathed slowly, trying to stay calm while Elias drove, one hand on the wheel and the other holding hers. He glanced at her every so often, trying to make sure she was okay, though the fear pounding in his chest made him feel helpless. When they arrived at the hospital, they were quickly attended to, and Camila was taken to the delivery room. Elias, though nervous, stayed by her side the entire time. The hours that followed were long and exhausting. Elias had never felt such an intense combination of fear and excitement. As he held Camila's hand, he saw the effort and pain on her face, but also the incredible strength she was showing in that moment. His admiration for his wife grew with each passing second. Finally, after what felt like endless hours, the sound of a baby's cry broke the tense silence of the room. Elias and Camila looked at each other, their eyes filled with tears of happiness and relief. The doctor lifted the baby, and as he placed her on Camila's chest, the room was filled with a peace they hadn't felt in months. "It's a girl," Elias whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. Camila, exhausted but radiant, looked at her daughter with tenderness. She gently stroked the baby's soft skin, whispering words of love as tears rolled down her cheeks. Elias leaned in, hugging them both, and for a moment, the entire outside world disappeared. They were a family. Hours later, as Camila rested with the baby in her arms, Elias stepped out of the room to get some fresh air. Despite the joy he felt, he knew the work was still waiting. The store was nearly ready for the grand opening, but there were still a few details to resolve. As he looked out the hospital window, he thought about his father, about everything he had left behind, and how fate had led them to this moment. The fight with his family, the closed doors, the daily struggles, it had all been worth it to reach where they were now. However, the shadow of his father still lingered, though distant. He knew that Carlos had tried everything to make their lives difficult, but what Carlos hadn't foreseen was that the love Elias shared with Camila was far stronger than any influence or power his father could wield. But the doubt still lingered. Was he truly free from his family? A few days after the birth of their daughter, whom they named Sophia, the grand opening of the store finally arrived. Camila, still recovering, oversaw the last details from a distance, while Elias and a few close friends helped with the preparations. There were balloons, flowers, and a simple but meaningful sign at the entrance: Sophia's Cakes. The opening day was a success. Neighborhood locals, regular customers who had tasted their cakes before, and some new curious visitors entered the small store, drawn by the delicious aroma and the welcoming atmosphere. Elias and Camila couldn't believe it. After months of sacrifice, hard work, and obstacles, their dream had finally come true. However, amidst the joy and buzz of the opening, Elias noticed a familiar figure among the customers walking in. It was Carlos, his father. Elias felt a knot form in his stomach. He didn't know what to expect from him. It had been months since they last spoke, and their last conversation hadn't ended well. Carlos, dressed in his impeccable suit, slowly approached the counter where Elias waited for him, his face serious. "Elias," Carlos said, his voice sounding less authoritative than usual. "I wanted to see how you were doing." Elias looked at him, unsure if his father came with good intentions or if this was just another attempt to make him feel like he had failed. "We're doing fine, Dad," Elias replied calmly, though inside his emotions were swirling. "I don't need your approval." Carlos observed him for a moment, and for the first time, Elias saw something he hadn't expected in his father's eyes: weariness. His father, the man who had always been the unshakable figure of power, looked older, more vulnerable. "I didn't come for that," Carlos said, taking a deep breath. "I came because I've been thinking, maybe I was wrong. I didn't expect you to get this far without us." Elias didn't know what to say. His father's words stunned him. For so long, he had fought to prove that he could do it on his own, without relying on the family's wealth, and now, standing before him, his father seemed ready to acknowledge that. "Don't get me wrong, Elias," Carlos continued. "I still don't think this is the path you should have taken." But his voice softened, something Elias had never heard from him before. "I can't ignore what you've achieved. I came to congratulate you, despite everything." Elias, still in shock, slowly nodded. "Thank you, Dad," he replied, not knowing what else to say. Carlos lingered for a few more seconds, as if he wanted to say something more, but in the end, he turned and left the store without looking back. Elias watched him leave, and a feeling of relief mixed with confusion washed over him. Perhaps it wasn't the end of his problems with his father, but at least, for the first time, there was a glimmer of reconciliation, however small. When Elias returned to Camila's side, she smiled at him, holding Sophia in her arms. "What happened?" she asked, noticing the expression on his face. "My father came to congratulate us," Elias replied, still in disbelief. Camila looked at him, surprised, but said nothing more. She simply extended her hand, and as he took his little daughter in his arms, he knew that no matter what happened, nothing could ever separate them. They had built something real, something of their own. The morning sun softly streamed through the windows of the small cake shop, illuminating the display cases full of delicious creations that had made Sophia's Cakes a success in the city. It was an ordinary day, but for Elias and Camila, every day in that space was a reminder of all they had achieved, together, against all odds. Sophia, now a few months old, lay in a makeshift crib at the back of the shop, laughing as she played with a small stuffed animal. Camila, with a look of love and serenity, worked in the kitchen, carefully decorating a special cake for a regular customer. Elias was at the counter, attending to customers with a smile that reflected more than just satisfaction with the business. It reflected peace, a peace he hadn't felt in a long time. After everything they had been through, from his father's threats to the moments of despair when it seemed like nothing would work, they had made it to this point. They looked at each other and smiled, knowing that the most important thing wasn't the business's success, but the fact that they had built something real, something no one could take away from them, a family, a home, and a future full of promise. That afternoon, as the flow of customers began to slow, Camila sat beside Elias, gently stroking Sophia's tiny hand as she slept peacefully. "Do you remember those early days?" Camila asked with a nostalgic smile. "Everything seemed so uncertain, and now, look where we are." Elias nodded, clearly remembering those days full of uncertainty. They had so many doubts, so many sleepless nights wondering if they could really make it. But he also remembered the small victories, the moments when they felt like they were making progress, even when everything seemed to be against them. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it, Elias replied, taking Camila's hand. Every sacrifice, every obstacle, it all brought us here. Camila looked at him, seeing in his eyes the same strength and determination that had won her over from the start. Despite everything they had lost by defying his family, she never regretted her choice. She had chosen love, and that love had sustained them in the darkest moments. Sometimes I think about what things would have been like if we had given in, Camila said, her voice touched with reflection. If you had done what your father wanted, if I had let the pressure tear us apart. Elias gently shook his head. We can't live thinking about what might have been. Everything we've been through brought us here, and I wouldn't change anything we have. Look at Sophia, he said, gesturing toward their little daughter. She's the proof that every decision was the right one. The silence that followed was one of peace, of a deep understanding between them. They knew their path hadn't been the easiest, but it was theirs, the one they had chosen together. Suddenly, the shop door opened softly, and they both looked up to see Carlos, Elias's father, slowly walk in. The tension that would have once been palpable in his presence was no longer there. On his face, they could see that something had changed in him too. He was no longer the man who had tried to control his son's life, who had tried to impose his will on him. Carlos approached the counter, looking around the shop. His eyes settled on Sophia, who was still peacefully sleeping. She's beautiful, Carlos said softly, breaking the silence. She looks like her mother. Elias exchanged a quick glance with Camila before nodding. He knew that his father's words were more than just a compliment. They were an acknowledgement, something he had never expected to hear. Thank you, Dad, Elias said, stepping closer to him. Carlos took a deep breath, as if struggling with something he had held onto for a long time. Finally, he let it go. I was wrong, Elias. I was wrong about so many things, he said, with a vulnerability he had never shown before. I thought what I was offering you was what was best for you, but I was blinded by my own pride. Seeing what you've built here, your family, this business, it makes me realize that money or power aren't always the most important things. Elias felt something heavy lift from his chest. He had waited so long to hear those words, and while he knew that not everything could be fixed right away, it was a step towards something better. All I ever wanted was to be happy with Camila and my daughter, Elias replied, his voice soft but full of conviction. I wanted you to see that, to understand it. Carlos nodded slowly, looking at his son with a mix of regret and respect. I see that now. And I'm sorry for putting you in the position I did. I'm not here to ask you for anything, just to say, I'm proud of what you've accomplished. Elias felt tears welling up in his eyes, but he swallowed them, staying strong. He extended his hand to his father, who, after a second of hesitation, took it. The gesture, though simple, was the beginning of something new. Camila, watching the scene, felt a peace she hadn't felt before. She knew Elias had carried the weight of his father's disapproval for so long, and seeing that reconciliation, however small, was a necessary closure for both of them. After Carlos left, the shop returned to silence, but this time it was a silence full of hope. There was a new beginning, not just for Elias and Camila, but for the relationship with the family he had left behind. Do you think things will change from now on? Camila asked as she cradled Sophia in her arms. Elias looked at her, reflecting for a moment. I don't know, he replied honestly. But what matters is that we're okay, and that won't change. Everything else will come with time. Camila smiled, resting her head on Elias's shoulder as they watched the sunset through the window. They had started with nothing, facing the greatest adversity they could imagine, but they had triumphed, not because they sought wealth or success, but because they had done it together, with love and mutual trust. And in that moment, as they held their daughter and sat in their small shop, they knew that true success wasn't material, but the family they had built. A family that, against all odds, had flourished, proving that love and perseverance can conquer even the greatest challenges. The future was uncertain, but Elias and Camila knew that, no matter what happened, they would keep moving forward, always together. And that was the greatest victory of all. If you enjoyed this story, leave a comment sharing how it made you feel, and if you've been through a similar situation, I'd love to hear your valuable opinion. I'd be honored if you left a like, shared the video with a friend or family member, and subscribed to the channel so you won't miss the next surprising story that's about to appear on your screen. We guarantee entertainment made just for you. See you in the next video.